Well, hello and welcome to the Movie Paradise. I am your host, Nathanael Molnár, and this is Movie Night Tonight. Every single week, we watch a movie and we discuss the film in depth. We are currently in the month of October, and October's theme is horror movies, and the film we are going to be discussing tonight is Psycho. I am joined by a great panel here. I've got with me Matt Smith.
Hello.
Crystal Gonzalez.
Hello.
And Connor Murphy.
Hello.
So, we watched the movie Psycho, which is Alfred Hitchcock's 1960 film. And I just want to go around the panel real quick and discuss very briefly, first initial thoughts of the film. And yes.
I have an initial thought not related to the film before people start talking about the film, and that's we watched the movie last night, so you should call this movie night last night.
Fair point.
Yeah.
Fair point.
You didn't need to tell him that. Magic of filmmaking. You don't know when it happened.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. I'm sorry. I like
you just
opened
pulled
the
back
veil.
the curtain.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Show's canceled. Let's go home.
So I just want to go around real quick the panel and say what our first initial thoughts on the film is and how many times we have seen the movie, starting with Matt.
Hi. So this is the second time that I've seen it. I think maybe seeing it the second time, knowing, as in any movie with a plot twist, seeing it the second time, you don't get the same like raw emotion. But it's still a very, very good movie, very well told movie. So,
yeah, Crystal.
This is my second time seeing it, and as much as I really like Psycho, I keep forgetting how long the actual movie is.
This is my first time ever seeing it, and I thought, in general, I find that there's a large disconnect between older movies and modern ways of thinking, or modern storytelling ideas. I felt this didn't have as much of a disconnect as a lot of other movies. I had a few issues with it, but for the most part, I felt like it was a very compelling narrative. I also want to say, since I feel like you forgot or you weren't going to say it yet, this is a spoiler discussion.
Yes.
We'll be spoiling it intensely.
Yes, we will. We will be spoiling Psycho.
So turn off your radios right now
if you have not
haven't
seen the film. Also, there's also a lot of people who I think know spoilers, but definitely it's preferred to listen to any of these discussions we're going to be having if you have already seen the movie. So real quick, my initial thoughts on the film is, and I've seen Psycho 2 times now. I really like this movie a lot. And I think it's a really interesting film from Alfred Hitchcock because I think it's very different from a lot of the movies he's made before. Interestingly enough, the first Hitchcock movie I believe I've ever seen was Psycho. And then I went back and I watched a lot of his other films after. And I don't know if the difference in his filmmaking techniques with his other films as compared to Psycho, I don't know if that necessarily set in when I saw Psycho first and then watched the other ones. But coming back to Psycho this time, it really hit home for how different of a movie this is and really what kind of it's a departure in filmmaking for Alfred Hitchcock. And I think that's one of the more intriguing elements about Psycho.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like it feels almost more like geared for popular audiences to experience something new than he has done before. I feel like he has this thing where he tries to subvert tropes a lot for popular audiences, but in this case, I feel like he created the tropes.
Huh. That's an interesting way to put it.
Like North by Northwest is he really subverts a lot of tropes of the spy movie genre or, action adventure is very different from his perspective. In this case, he has created a new genre. I don't know that he would consider it part of another genre that already existed because it's not a monster movie. And that was the only type of horror movie that seemed to exist before that. I might be wrong on that, but...
No, I think it's really interesting because one of the aspects about this film is that it's not a horror movie through and through. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things I was looking at, because I think this whole month that we've been watching these horror movies, none of these films have been straight horror movies. Mm-hmm. We watched The Thing, which was more science fiction horror, same with Alien, and now this is a very different horror film. And I think there's a point in this movie where it switches from being becomes a horror movie. I think for most of the film, it's a more mystery thriller.
I might even call it a thriller all the way.
Yeah.
At least by modern standards, I think it's more of a thriller all the way through.
Yeah, and then I think there's a point where it becomes a horror movie, which I think that's what makes this very interesting.
Yeah, my point was that I think that it could be a thriller even in the part that, you would say it changes to a horror movie, but I think it's also valid to say it changes to a horror movie there. But definitely there are scenes that are shot as horror scenes. I would not argue that at all.
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, where would you say that it flips? Is it like, because there's obviously the obvious time when the first killing happens. Like, how far before that would you say that it starts?
I think it's very late in the movie. I think it's when we have the plot twist.
Really?
Yeah.
Because that's when it becomes a horror movie, because that changes the perspective of which you view the film. And so I think up until then, it's a murder mystery, but it's more of a mystery thriller. And then at that point, when we realize that he has taken his mother's corpse, now we're in the spoiler territory.
Yeah.
Like full out. He has taken his mother's corpse from the cemetery and has a split personality. And when you have that reveal, that informs the whole movie that came before it, and that changes everything. And that right there, that plot twist of like what's really going on, that's terrifying. And I think that changes it from just, it's a strange motel owner who is, and there's a couple murders. There's 2 murders that happen, and that's it. And the rest of it's trying to figure out what's happening, and you think that it's all about the money, and it's not about the money at all. It's because you have this unbalanced person who has a split personality and is becoming the mother and is killing people, and then it completely changes the narrative completely. And I think it's when you understand that's really what's going on and that's really what the story is about, that's when it becomes a horror movie and it's not a mystery thriller anymore.
Kind of flips the genre in hindsight rather than in the actual action.
And I think what's interesting is that now in 2018, people are watching this movie from 1960 knowing it's a horror movie. But I don't think the people watching it when it came out in 1960, they didn't have that all those years later to think about it in those terms. They kind of took it as it was. And I think the part of the plot twist is the genre twist. And I think people experienced that more in the moment when it came out as opposed to all these years later that we're watching it now.
Yeah, they probably watched it from the mindset of a mystery.
Yeah. No, and because that's more how Alfred Hitchcock wasn't really known for horror. He was known for suspense.
Yeah.
And so, and I think there's definitely a ton of suspense elements in this film. But there is a clear genre twist that accompanies the plot twist. And I think that's really so to answer your question, I think it's about that's where it takes the turn into a horror movie.
Where does this fall in his career? Was this an earlier or a later film?
This was a later. I don't know exactly. This was 1960, so he had already done. North by Northwest was the year before.
Okay,
so
he'd already built up a decent reputation.
he was in his prime as a filmmaker at this point. I don't know if I don't think it was exactly in the middle. Yeah, but it was closer to the middle than the beginning, and probably closer to the middle than the end.
Yeah,
I'm looking at his IMDb. It is towards the end. It's before the birds. I didn't realize that. Yeah, but it's definitely towards the end of the middle.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's like towards the end of the middle. So he had built up a pretty, like, people knew who he was. He had built up a reputation. He'd built up notoriety as a filmmaker. And then, so I think this very much just takes what people know about him as a director and turns it on its head.
Yeah.
Nathaniel, you're probably going to need to put a timeline on so people can actually follow what we're saying.
Yeah, that would be a good idea. Or pull up your phone, go on IMDb, join us right there.
Yeah, do it yourself.
Just be warned, you're gonna need to pull up your IMDb on your phone for about the next 5 minutes of this conversation for it to make any sense.
Yeah.
Nice.
Is this the, would you say that college is the middle of the beginning of the middle of our lives?
I thought it was just the end of my life.
I mean, that's a mood.
It's a very dark joke to make on live radio.
There you go.
So,
We're back.
So, talking about the context of this movie within Alfred Hitchcock's career, one of the things that really interests me is that there was a very deliberate and clear decision to make this film in black and white. That was even going back to, it wasn't as if Hitchcock had only done black and white before and he just didn't have an opportunity to do color. If you go to the year before, Rear Window was color. So he had made pretty much all color films. And then he chose deliberately to make this one black and white. And I think that's a very interesting decision for the film, and I think it suits the film very well. And I was just curious to talk about that a little bit as to why does black and white so well suit this narrative and this film in particular.
I think it just adds more to the mystery of if rather color is fine, but if you watch it in black and white, it just builds up that mystery because we don't really see much.
Yeah, you're more disconnected from it when it's in black and white. It's less like the real world.
Yeah.
I also think, the realist in me, the first reaction I had was it was because they wanted to use chocolate sauce as blood, like they did in old movies. I have no idea how accurate.
That was
the point,
they did.
yeah.
They did use
But
that.
that
was Hitchcock himself, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
He's the one known for that.
But color movies, they probably already had fake blood that looked good at that point. They'd been in color for a while, so.
Yeah.
But that was my first reaction. I think the end shot really says it all, why he chose black and white. You don't get the same effect of, hiding his eyes and then looking up kind of thing with the shadow. Things like that. People's faces can be cast in harder shadows, which obscures their intentions more in black and white. I think color shadows are more too real looking. Yeah. When they are black and white shadows, your face is just cut into strips of light or dark, and that's a lot more. You have a lot harder time reading that person. Yeah, and they definitely wanted to make Norman Bates hard to read.
I hadn't considered that angle before, because that very much falls in line with his character. That you don't understand him at all, and you're not supposed to understand him. He's not a character you can easily read.
You're supposed to be made uneasy by him, even when it seems innocuous when he makes her sandwiches. Even the fact the way that he asks to have dinner with her is already uneasy.
Exactly. It just adds to the mystery with black and white because it's hard to read in black and white.
Yeah.
And I think going to the character Norman Bates, I think that's really interesting about him and how he's presented as a character. Because at least the way I look at it is that there's something off about him, but you can't place it. You don't know exactly what it is about him that's off, but you can tell, he comes across as a very nice person and making the sandwiches and having dinner with her, but you can tell there's something there. There's something behind this niceness about him. Yeah, you can tell there's something different about him that makes you a little bit more uneasy, and I think that adds to what we as the film progresses and we learn that there's more to him that we didn't know.
I feel like taxidermy really gives it away that there's something not right.
Yeah.
Yeah, all the taxidermy birds and
that
everything.
Is definitely a hobby that is just used solely for making people uncomfortable.
Yeah. And that I think they also place it pretty well in the film. They let you meet him for a little, they give you a few scenes to just get used to him. And then they show you that, and it's oh, I'm really uneasy now.
Especially also since they don't address it immediately. They just let you see it.
Yeah.
And they let you, I think it's not until they sit down and have begun talking that taxidermy comes up.
And it works so perfectly because her name is Marion Crane. And he stuffs birds. Yeah. And so there's this kind of subconscious connection between the two that when you understand that, it kind of immediately you understand what his intentions are.
Yeah.
Also just shows that he's pretty okay with keeping around dead bodies.
Yeah.
If that's not foreshadowing, I don't know what is.
Well, because I think with the taxidermy and the fact that he does it himself, and he explicitly says he does it himself, going to what you're saying, he has this detachment from death. And he is completely fine with, like, at least in the case of the taxidermy, dead animals, and he doesn't feel a connection to that. And I think that easily translates into with humans, in that he doesn't, and especially if you look at his response to when Marion Crane dies in the shower scene, he reacts to it, but he doesn't react to it to the same extent that I think a lot of people would react. I think it would hit people more, but instead he sees it and he has a momentary thing of, oh my God, there's a dead body. And then it's immediately like, well, this is what I got to do. And he starts wiping everything down, and he doesn't have any problems with it, and he just completely moves on.
Yeah.
And I think the key important thing in a taxidermy is that it kind of gives a window into who he is as a character almost immediately.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think it was very strategically placed so that we, for a film that we can't really place who Norman Bates is, and we don't have a very strong and clear window into who he is as a character, the placement of the taxidermy is a very clear window into who he is as a character without explicitly saying so.
Yeah. I think this film really shines in the way that they expose him. Like, I think it's a really hard thing to do, to make a character be characterized by such subtle details, but you get that sense of unease without knowing anything about him. They came up with the perfect details to just, like, give you just enough to know what you need to know about him for the film to progress.
Yeah.
And not any of... Because they very easily could have, like, laid in on the... he lives with his mother and he's trapped with his mother or whatever. And they could have just, you know, made that even more of an issue throughout the beginning of the film. But they managed to pick just the details you need to know to be made slightly uneasy by him, but also feel like he's probably harmless, I think, for you know, the beginning of the film.
Quick question. This arose, I guess that I didn't notice it the first time, but is the peephole symbol, you know, say anything else about him, just that he's just kind of odd? I'm not really sure how that sort of fits into
Well, what do you mean, the...
Like, just, like, I don't see how the peephole goes into him having, you know, multiple personalities, or...
What do you mean by the people?
What the peephole? Like when he takes the painting off.
Oh, peephole. I thought you were saying people.
No, peephole.
Like plural person.
Peephole.
Oh, peephole.
The
yes.
people. No, the people. No, the people.
I think that just kind of adds to the uneasiness.
Yeah,
like that's a creepy moment, and I don't think you ever get the sense that it's necessarily like a sexual thing. It's more of like it just adds to how like weird of a person. Yeah, because
it definitely adds to it. Definitely.
It's meant to be unsettling.
Yeah, but it definitely does sort of subvert. Like when you see peephole, it's like very. I feel like I need to enunciate it.
Peephole.
Peephole. It feels like it brings it kind of like mischaracterizes him in a little bit of a way, because it's like you think, like what you start thinking about because of it, isn't really what he is.
Yeah.
So I feel like it just adds to like the creepiness, but doesn't really reflect anything about him on like a deeper level.
I feel like they kind of try to confuse you about what you should be uneasy about with him.
There is some misdirection, yeah.
I feel like the peephole is there for that purpose. It's there to make you feel like, oh no, he's like a creep or a rapist or something. And I think the taxidermy kind of makes you uneasy about that. And then he starts talking about, I could never do this to a bigger animal. And then you're like, oh, maybe that's not what I should be uneasy about. And I feel like that scene where they have dinner together is very much trying to direct you, and like you think this might be what's wrong with him, or this might be, and you never like pin it down.
But what's interesting is that now with the understanding of the plot twist, it's not necessarily misdirection, because that's really what Norman Bates is like.
Yeah, he has multiple directions.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not that that's untrue of Norman Bates. It's that a lot of these the more murderous parts of him come from the personality of the mother. Yeah. And so when you have the plot twist, it kind of redefines and reshapes the way you look at the film as a whole. Yeah. And I think that's something I would like to get into about this movie, and that Connor, I'd like to talk to you specifically about this, because I think when we all watched it last night, when we watched the film, since Crystal, Matt, and I had seen the movie before, I know I was looking at it very much through the lens of, I know that Norman Bates is really the mother. I know the mother is not alive. I know the mother isn't real. So I knew all these elements about it, and that shaped the way that I watched it. So I'm curious, how does it specifically shape your view of the movie, having watched it, not knowing that, and then now you know? How does that change the way you look at the movie, and how does that like give more depth or dimension to the film?
Well, first of all, did you look at my face at all during the reveal?
I glanced. And I didn't want to look too much because I thought you would know that maybe something was coming, but I just kind of like glanced over my shoulder. I was like, not enough of a look to see what was going on.
Because my mouth was wide open the whole time. Like, it totally got me.
I love watching people watch movies, I gotta say.
Yeah.
Sit Connor in front of the TV and then sit us all in front of Connor.
Yes.
There's so tangent a little bit, but there's a scene in Amelie. They're talking about things that the characters like, because the whole beginning of the film is characterizing, this is what this character likes.
Amelie?
Yeah. And this is what this character doesn't like. One of the things they say about Amelie is that she likes to look behind her at all of the people's faces while they're watching movies. It's an interesting detail. And it's kind of like you can do that. People can't tell that you're looking at them in a theater most of the time.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a weird and funny coincidence. Anyway, I found like it totally. I wasn't expecting that at all. It totally didn't come out of the blue. When it happened, it made sense, which is an important distinction. A plot twist shouldn't come out of the blue. It should instantly make sense.
Exactly.
Which is an issue that I have with other plot twists that I feel like you're trying to put together. How could this have happened if? And that's sometimes.
And then
an
it starts
issue.
to unravel and it falls apart.
Yeah, but a good plot twist like this one, instantly, like it happens and then you're like, oh, wow, and it just like everything makes sense now. And I feel like the narrative was very, very strong. I was very engaged in what the mystery was, how they were going to fare in finding it out. And as things started to unravel, like his mother was dead, who was buried, I had a bunch of things in my head, like maybe they buried the woman that she found her husband with, or I wasn't sure. Like I was probably following the same lines of thought that the Sam and her sister were going through.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out what happened to her. I was trying to figure out what could possibly be the truth of it out of all of these things that might be, the variables that could change, like where's his mother, and stuff like that. And so when the plot twist finally came, because I think they make it so that for you the mystery is about the mother more than the mystery is about anything that happened to her, because you saw everything that happened to her. Well, you saw everything that happened to her.
Yeah.
You thought you knew the whole time. And I really did. I really thought that I knew until that last scene. So it definitely was an effective movie. I felt like there was one scene that I was bothered by in that movie, and it was the psychiatrist explaining everything away. It was. I feel like it was a drawn-out scene. It could have been shown a little bit more elegantly. I think it could have been shown in the scene where they caught Norman, or I don't know exactly, but there are definitely more elegant ways to show it than have a psychiatrist come out and explain it for a minute and a half.
See, I agree, but I also kind of disagree, because for me, exposition dumps bother me and I think this is clearly an exposition dump, but exposition dumps bother me when it's information the characters already know.
Yeah.
And it's clearly the filmmakers are going out of their way to, like, we got to tell the audience this, but the characters already know it. So we'll just say, wait, so tell me that again? Well, blah, 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 and just say it all again.
Yeah.
Or, something along those lines. And I try to, when I see an exposition dump, I try to say, well, realistically, if this was happening in real life, would the character have said that?
Yeah.
And you have, in a police station, they just apprehended a criminal, and you have a psychiatrist talk to them. The psychiatrist is probably going to go to the police captain and say, hey, this is what I figured out. And so could it have been done better? Yes, I think it could have been done better.
Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily bother me because I think it fits in line with what would have happened anyways in real life if something like that. It just could have been maybe masked a little bit better.
It definitely fits realism, but my main argument to that is just I don't think filmmaking is necessarily about realism, it's about story.
Mhm.
And the realism plays into that, but I think the most important thing is following the story and being engaged. And in that part, it felt like I could have left before that, and I had already seen the story.
Mhm.
I think that part could have been woven into the story better. And then there was the end shot of him, fully having become his mother and talking to himself. I feel like that felt like it had been chopped off of the movie. A thing had been put in that was like, just in case you didn't know, here's all these things. I mean, you don't know them, but here's an explanation. And then, here's this other scene. It felt like story, explanation of story, and then another scene.
No, and I don't disagree with that assessment of it. I'm just saying, for me, it doesn't necessarily stick out as much because I feel like that would have happened in real life if this was happening. And I get that filmmaking is not supposed to be focusing on the realism of film, but exposition bothers me when it breaks realism, and it's very clearly the filmmaker spoon-feeding something to the audience because they have to tell the audience, but there's no way narratively and character-based for that information to be told.
Mm-hmm.
That's when it bothers me, and that's when it really sticks out to me. And I don't think that's necessarily the case in Psycho. Mm-hmm. But I do agree. I think there was a better way they could have done it. Maybe then you don't leave the big twist of what's going on for the last 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't save it all the way till the very end, and then you can kind of pepper in a lot of what the psychiatrist is saying throughout the climax of the film.
Yeah.
But then again, I think that kind of goes against why the movie works so well, is that it's building, and then it hits, and then you're pretty much right out of the movie after that.
Yeah.
So I think there's a give and take, and there's a few different ways it could have been handled. But I agree, it's not the greatest way they could have handled that scene.
I feel like it kind of comes with the plot twist. I feel like there are ways to handle a plot twist. And this was a very well done plot twist. I just think that there was too much explaining necessary, and that's why that scene was included.
Yeah.
The plot twist could have been done in a way that maybe just extend that scene a little bit, and they could have added a few details that gave you a little bit more of an idea. Although, to comment on explaining things, the people of that time period probably knew a lot less about multiple personalities or schizophrenia or anything like that.
That's true.
So, they were probably much less exposed to mental illnesses, and so this might have been the first time they ever heard of that.
Yeah.
So, it's definitely also has to do with the time period.
And so, go ahead, Matt.
One I was going to say on the time period, I mean, I feel like it's sort of, in that scene, there's the whole transvestite line.
Oh, yeah.
Which I feel like sort of adds to it being like this is how that actually would have happened. Because obviously when you hear man wearing women's clothes, that would be where people of that time, immediately that's where their mind would go to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also just on the last scene, I always felt like it could have maybe, I guess this is just me thinking about how I would have done it, but just sort of intercutting the explanation with the shots of him progressively getting more sinister, I guess you could say, and then sort of ending it on that. I always felt that
combine the last shot with the last scene before it.
Basically, just go back and forth between the perspectives while you're talking about him. Show him, her. Him being the mother, but.
Yeah.
Him talking to himself and then go back to a cutoff line about an explanation, but you're getting it because you're seeing what's happening. Yeah.
I always felt like that's how it probably could have been done, but that's a
good point.
That's
I
hindsight.
100% agree.
I think that would work a lot more with the last two scenes.
Yep.
Yeah. Recut the movie and say you improved on Hitchcock's work. Try doing that.
So, having had Connor's perspective on what it's like to watch this movie, not knowing the twist, because I think there's a lot of people who just because this movie is old, they know already that twist. There's not too many times where that someone doesn't know the twist now at this point, this far after the movie's come out, and get to watch it with fresh eyes. But going to Matt and Crystal, I'm interested, now that you've seen the movie a couple of times now, you knew the plot twist going in, how does watching this movie, knowing what is to come and knowing the plot twist, how does that shape and affect your viewing experience watching it this time?
When I first watched the movie, I actually it's been a long time since I watched it, and so going around the second time watching this movie, I was actually kind of confused about the plot twist. So it felt like I was watching it for the first time, and because I haven't seen it in a few years or so.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think it still had the same effect. Just because I haven't seen it in a while.
Yeah. Well, no, that's I think that's interesting. Because I know I hadn't seen it in a couple of years, and while I knew the basic points and I knew the basic plot twist, scene to scene, there were a lot of things that I didn't remember, and I didn't know exactly how something flowed into another part of the film and exactly how it was strung together. And I think that just kind of goes to when you watch a movie that you haven't seen in a while, you can still you're never going to have exactly the same experience as watching something completely fresh for the first time, but you can capture a lot of that feeling when watching it after having not seen it in a while.
Yeah, it makes you think about it differently.
Yeah.
Even if you've watched it once, but then you're like, I'm not going to watch this ever again. Watch it a second time. It's like, I never knew that was going to happen. Kind of feel like it's like, I never noticed it before. No.
Yeah. So Matt, you'd seen Psycho a couple of times.
Yep.
So how did you remember the plot twist before watching?
Pretty much.
So,
it was fairly recently that I'd seen
Psycho. So watching the film, having seen that plot twist and knowing that plot twist, how did that inform your viewing experience?
I feel like watching it this time sort of fell into the regular sort of, when you know something happens, you basically will you end up, instead of watching a movie, maybe you look for the hints, which is a mark of a good movie and a plot twist that's well done, that when you watch it the second time, everything is totally, makes sense. Obviously the taxidermy, how important that is to his character overall, that's something you get the second time watching it, not the first time.
Yeah.
So I think it just sort of fell into sort of the scavenger hunt to how could I have figured this thing out before I was told, sort of experience, which is always fun.
Yeah.
It's being able to watch a movie and have a completely new experience the second time is always, enjoyable.
Yeah. So moving on a little bit, I found this movie really interesting regarding this point, that you have who seems to be the main protagonist, main character of the film, Marion Crane. Mm-hmm. And she seems like she is the main character. And she dies an hour into the movie.
You're right.
And then the narrative shifts, and it seems like the private investigator then becomes the main character. And then he dies.
Oh.
And then you're left wondering who is the main protagonist of the film. And I think what's really interesting is that even watching it multiple times, it doesn't... I think when you watch it the first time, you're caught up in the story of Marion Crane, and you think she's the main character, then she dies, then it's a private investigator, then he dies. And I think you're ultimately left to realize that the film is really about Norman Bates.
Right. He
is the main character. But even when you watch the movie multiple times, knowing that, it doesn't feel like it is his movie. I feel like I still experience the film, having seen it a couple of times now. I still experience it as I'm viewing the film through the lens of this character, then they die, then this character, then they die, and then the ultimate realization of who the main character is. That effect you still have that effect even with multiple viewings. I don't know, would you find that to be the case?
Yeah, I think so. I feel like the character, the main characters, the constant switching, you're left wondering who the main character is. And it's Norman, even though it doesn't come until late, and it's very subtle. Mm-hmm. And it's just telling the story of each character until you realize Norman Bates is the main character.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I I really like that about this movie.
Yeah.
And I think it kind of goes back to something when we were talking about on our Alien discussion, that Alien doesn't really have a clear protagonist until the very end of the film.
Right.
You have people who seem like they're the main protagonist who kind of end up being killed off until you ultimately realize who is actually the central character in the film. And I think that kind of plays into Psycho as well.
Yeah. I agree with the alien thing.
Yeah. So, Matt, I'm curious, how does this whole main character thing, how do you take that?
I feel like you could make an argument that she doesn't stop being the main character. Or I think what really makes it work is that even though she dies, she's still so prominent. She dies, but the movie then is like, okay, what happened to her?
Yeah.
So, and she never even the ending is her like, oh wait, so my sister is dead.
Yeah.
And like him having to say that, yes, Liz, I'm very sorry. But like, so she stops being in the movie, but she never stops being in the movie, if that makes sense.
Well, and I think it's interesting because it's not just that the main character dies, but it's because the story changes so much when the character does die that your understanding of what the story of the film is so completely changes. Yeah. Because when you're watching the movie for the first hour, the story is a woman takes $40,000 from her boss, goes on the run, goes to this motel, and then suddenly she's killed. And then the story changes, and now the story of the film is we have to a private investigator tries to figure out what's going on, and then he dies. And then the story with each character death, with each of the protagonists' death, the nature of the story changes so dramatically that it's constantly changing. And I think that's really, it's not so much just that the characters are dying, but that the story is fundamentally changing and evolving as each character dies.
And I think also it's not like there's just no way to tell that this character is going to not be the main character, because like they have the policeman that follows her, suspicious of her, and like that I think to most people that makes it pretty, or at least they think that's pretty clear that there's so much going into this $40,000 on the run thing that it has to be throughout the entire movie. Because what other use would this character be other than to make it more, make it a suspense of, on the run sort of movie.
I really wish I could have seen it in theaters when I didn't know anything about it. Like, I already knew the Bates Motel was going to be the centerpiece of the film. I already knew about the shower scene. I've seen that before. I feel like seeing it as an audience when it first came out, not knowing anything about it, thinking all you know is that it's going to be like a crime thriller of some sort. And, you go in, you see this woman on the run with $40,000, you think that's obviously the plot. Mm-hmm. And you're just totally surprised when it turns around. I feel like I've had too much exposure to people talking about the film or reactions to the film, even the fact that a show exists about it and I know who the main character of the show is. Yeah.
And I think even that whole mystery of the $40,000 and what supposed significance it's supposed to have with the story, that even plays in with the characters. Because you have the Sam and the sister, their immediate assumption is that this is all about the $40,000.
Or he just threw it in the swamp.
Yeah, exactly. It was such like a complete throwaway thing. But they assume it has to be about this. This is what it has to be about. And I think that's genius because, as we were just saying, that's what we assume the film is all about in the very beginning. We think this is so important. This is so instrumental into this movie coming together as a whole. And then it's immediately thrown away. And then the characters have that same feeling that it's all about that $40,000.
Yeah.
I really like how they just disregard the $40,000 at the end. Like, what happened to the money? Oh, it's in the swamp.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What?
I feel like...
We're really just going to just gloss over that? Okay.
Well, they were digging up the car after, so maybe they were trying to let's get that $40,000.
Yeah. I think they that's part of how they really address, they make sure that that everybody else doesn't understand him either.
Yeah.
Because it's all about the $40,000 for them, that they don't get it so you're still with the characters on that. I also think I want to point out that the psychiatrist scene when he's explaining everything, he's like super like gung-ho to explain everything. He's like super excited that he's figured it out, and he's like, I know this and none of you do, and I'm about to tell you. And then she's like, so my sister's dead? And he's like, yeah, sorry.
yeah, sorry about that.
And then he goes back to being like, and it's this, and I look at this thing that I know because I'm a cool psychiatrist.
I just happened to bring my degree with me.
Yeah.
So, before we wrap up, the last thing I'd really like to talk about is the shower scene, because I think that's one of like probably the most famous sequences from this film.
One of the most famous sequences ever, honestly.
Yeah. And I think
chances are, even if you haven't seen the movie, you've seen that scene.
Exactly.
Or you've seen it referenced.
It's an infamous scene. And I think what's really interesting is that for a movie that I contend to be very atypical from Alfred Hitchcock's filmography, it's super Hitchcock in terms of the scene. That you can feel like his fingerprints all over that scene. And I think that one scene is very quintessential Alfred Hitchcock. And I think it's a brilliant scene. I think it's incredibly effective. Just I'm sure Matt can attest to the editing, the rapid-fire editing. And I remember for one of our film classes, the textbook had the storyboards for this scene on the cover. And I remember I was looking at that and I was realizing like just how planned out this was and how deliberate every shot was. And then to watch this scene again, knowing just how staged and planned out everything was, every shot and every moment of this sequence, this like, what is it, even a minute? Not even
No.
It's like right around there, like maybe 40 seconds. Very deliberate, clear choices for every shot of this little sequence, and it just, I think it has such a clear effect. It has very deliberate intentions as to what it means for the story, and it's supposed to completely just change everything about the narrative. And I gotta say, I think my favorite part of that is I love the shot where the camera moves in on the drain and then it fades and it's her eye. And it pulls out. I love that. I think that, like, I love that shot.
One thing I want to say about that scene, the first thing, so all I have seen of that scene before is just the very basic act of the murder. I hadn't seen that any of the silhouette of the person or anything. I had no idea what the person looked like in that scene. So when I watched it, the first thing that I saw was just a silhouette coming up to the curtain, and the first thought in my head was, that's Norman Bates. And then the silhouette got closer. That doesn't look like Norman Bates. Cut to behind the person. It looks like his mother. That's not Norman Bates.
Yeah.
But the first thought is, that's Norman Bates. And the first thought's the right one.
See, that's really interesting. That's really interesting. I like that because I know when I was watching this movie, because I knew you hadn't seen it, and I knew, or at least I was suspecting that you didn't know the plot twist. And so I was thinking in my head, I was like, how believable is it that you don't know this is Norman Bates? And I think that's the thing you have to think about anytime you watch a movie that has a plot twist, is how is it not obvious? And what steps do they take? Because when I watched the movie, it looks very much like a wig. And you don't see any clear shots of the mother. It's always very bird's eye view shots. It's always shots masked in shadow and everything. It's not clear shooting. And in my head, watching it, knowing the eventual outcome, in my head, that's like, oh, they're trying to hide something. And that kind of plays back into the black and white thing, is that maybe those things would be more apparent if it was in color. But so I think that's interesting that your first thought is, oh, that's Norman Bates, and then you're like, oh wait, that's not Norman Bates, and that thought immediately goes out of your head and you don't think about it again. And then you get to the end of the film and you're like, oh wait, I was right. That is Norman Bates.
So the first time you watched it, you already knew the plot twist?
I don't remember exactly. It was years ago that I watched it for the first time, so I don't remember specifically.
Can Crystal or Matt comment on that? When you watched it, did you know the plot twist the first time?
No, I didn't know the plot twist the first time.
Did you feel like it was his mother when the killing happened?
It kind of like went that way, but then the way the shots point out, and I'm like, is this actually the mother?
What about you, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose looking back, I couldn't say that I'm not 100% sure, but looking at it, when you start to notice that you're not seeing everything, it's kind of clear that there's something being hidden. But I feel like when you're watching it the first time, you're not like trying to catch the filmmakers in an act. Most of the time you believe what's being shown in front of you, unless for some reason you really don't trust filmmakers.
Like Charlie Roberts, for those of you who don't know him.
The legend.
Yeah, the legend. He has said, he's a professor at Fitchburg. He has said that when you make a film, you have a captive audience. They want to believe you the whole time. So you can get away with stuff because they want to believe it.
Yeah.
So that probably plays into why I believed it. But I think feeling that I got about his mother the whole time was that she was some sort of mythical, legendary figure that nobody really knew that much about. I figured that he just had an awkward relationship with her and he just didn't talk about her that much. And, I don't know. He was keeping her from the world because she did something bad, and I don't know. But whatever the case, I felt like she was kept that way just to be like his tragic backstory. She's not a character. Yeah. She's about Norman.
Yeah, I guess for me, when I'm watching a film, I'm cynical. So in my head, I'm thinking if they're not showing me something, it's because they're hiding something.
Yeah, don't trust filmmakers.
But I mean, like, because of that, whenever I watch a movie and they're not showing something, or they're going out of their way to hide something by going up from a bird's eye view so that you only see the back, or it's cloaked in shadow and everything. Like when filmmakers take those active steps to not show something, my mind immediately goes to, well, why aren't they showing that? And maybe it's because of films like Psycho are so formative in that, subverting expectations and taking something that you think is going one way and changing it drastically, and then you realize, oh, how did I not pick up on that? And it was this point and this point and this point that just went over my head. And maybe it's movies like that have kind of, I've seen that and it's kind of twisted that. And so now I'm looking for that. Mm-hmm. I know the first time I saw Fight Club, I knew there was a twist, but I didn't know what the twist was.
I haven't seen Fight Club, and I don't know what the twist is.
I'm not going to say what the twist was.
Welcome to the spoiler discussion for Fight Club.
Yeah.
So
I want to do that soon. That would be a great discussion. But I knew there was a twist, but I didn't know what the twist was. So the entire movie, I was looking for what could be the twist. Mm-hmm. And I think I remember it within the first 5 minutes, I threw around in my head a whole bunch of theories of what the twist could be. And I actually said what the twist was in my head. It was one of the ones I had thought of.
What was it? I'm
Cover your ears, Connor.
Do you want me to just walk?
No, I don't want to say
out,
it
Connor.
I don't want to say it on the air. But I just think that's interesting. We're looking for the twist, and we're looking for what that is. And maybe it is movies like Psycho that make us look for that.
Yeah.
Because of a movie like Psycho that has such a twist that changes everything about the narrative so completely and so deeply that now we're forever trying to figure out what the twist is in another movie.
Yeah, it's a fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice.
If you are willing to suspend your disbelief for movies, I think they're better. That's why I've always been afraid of being in film school is going to make me watch movies more critically. Mm-hmm. And I feel like if I am willing to suspend my disbelief and not be critical of movies while I'm watching them for the first time, I think that enriches the way that I watch movies. And I really consciously tried to just be invested in the story.
Yeah. So I think this is a good point to go around and say our final thoughts real quick on Psycho, starting with Matt.
Nothing significant. It's a good movie. I enjoyed it. Good to watch. Probably not one you would want to watch a lot. I feel like the longer the distance between watching it, probably the better.
Yeah.
But, still solid movie.
Yeah.
There you go.
Crystal?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty good movie. I don't have any thoughts on it.
I can definitely see the inspirations that other movies took from Psycho. I saw so much of the DNA of tropes being formed that probably hadn't been formed at all before that. I'm hesitant to say that because I'm not super familiar with the time period. I don't know what movies before and after were like. I feel like it could be credited with creating a lot of tropes, and I feel like you can see those tropes. And because it's so early, I assume it was one of the first.
Yeah. I think since the movie is so significant still today,
Yeah.
it's safe to
Even
if it wasn't the first one to do it, it's the one that made it popular.
Yeah.
It's the one that it's the one that carried those tropes still today. So I think you're totally safe to say what you're saying.
I think I can see why. I feel like it's a very good movie. It impacted me a lot even today. I feel like it would have impacted me back then even more if I were in those audiences.
Yeah.
So definitely, I enjoyed this film a lot. It had its problems, but it deserves to be the groundbreaking film that it was, I think.
Yeah. And then going into my final thoughts real quick. I really like this movie and appreciate it because I feel like it's very different from Hitchcock's other films. I feel like it's very atypical to what he's done before. He's definitely more suspense-oriented with a lot of his other movies, and this one's, you don't realize it's a horror movie until the very end, I think, and I appreciate how the narrative changes throughout and how it subverts expectations and plays on them while also drastically changing the story and the lens of which you view the story through. It completely kills off the main character an hour in, brings up another main character that you think is the central main character, and this is what the story's about now, and then kills that main character, and then you're left with realizing who is the real main character. It's Norman Bates, and it changes the way you look at the movie, and I think that is the sign of a master filmmaker. And I think that is a reason why a lot of people hold Psycho to be his best movies, because I think it's a it's a great testament to his abilities as a filmmaker. So I definitely really appreciate Psycho for those reasons. Well, that has been our discussion of Psycho. Once again, I am Nathanael Molnár, and I am joined by a great panel today, Matt Smith.
Thanks for having me.
Crystal Gonzalez.
Thanks for having me.
Connor Murphy.
Hi.
And so, just to give a little taste of what is to come, next week we are discussing The Exorcist.
I can't wait for it.
That's going to be a great one. I'm really looking forward to that. Of course, continuing with our themes of horror
Yeah, we getting
movies.
spooky up in here.
Watch it with us so that you can know what we're talking about.
Yes, exactly. So you have a week to watch The Exorcist. Watch it.
Yo.
And then come back to WXPL 91.3 Fitchburg Radio at 8 o'clock on Wednesdays to hear about our thoughts on The Exorcist. So make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. And, of course, be sure to follow us on our various social medias at Movie Paradise 99. You'll get updates as to what we're talking about, what movies are going to be discussed more on movie night tonight, so that you have enough time to watch and prepare for. And thank you so much for listening. And until next time, thanks, everyone.